From the void, we watched them emerge, tiny, fragile forms scuttling across the cold expanse of the stars. Their ships, crude and unpolished, rattled through space with a precarious persistence, as if any misstep could fracture their fragile frames into oblivion. By our standards, they were insignificant, yet even before they reached the edge of our observation fields, there was a strange electricity around them, a flicker of defiance we had not anticipated. At first glance, they seemed ill-prepared for interstellar existence. Their hulls lacked the sleek geometry that defines a civilized species. Their engines sputtered like newborn stars. But we, the watchers of the cosmos, sensed an undercurrent that made our sensors hum with unease. These humans did not flee at the first hint of threat. Their movements were jittered with hesitation, yes, but every motion carried an intention, a quiet calculation buried beneath the surface of apparent panic. We observed them navigating the labyrinth of diplomacy with other species, primitive signals, awkward gestures, barely functional communications. And yet in every awkward handshake, every bow slightly too formal, every tilt of the head, there was purpose. Even fear itself seemed to follow an invisible rhythm, a pulse measured not in survival, but in courage. How could such a small, fragile species radiate such resolute energy? Our analytic frameworks faltered. Our simulations hesitated. They were unarmed, yet their presence exuded threat. Their eyes, too large, too expressive, scanned each alien figure not with submission, but with an awareness that bordered on presension. In their hesitation, we detected a strange harmony, recklessness entwined with foresight. One could not predict their next step, yet every step carried weight. Every misstep might have been catastrophic, yet somehow they navigated chaos as if it were a familiar rhythm. Even the simplest of interactions, exchanging supplies, greeting emissaries, became acts of revelation. What seemed trivial to us held profound significance. A slight nod, the way they tilted their heads to indicate comprehension, a hand extended and grasped with precision, hinted at a species whose value system extended beyond mere survival. They measured honor, intention, and perhaps even morality, all beneath a veil of uncertainty that no machine could decipher. As we cataloged their attempts at negotiation, a creeping apprehension took hold. Could these fragile forms harbor a force we could not predict? Could they, in their apparent weakness, conceal a resilience that even we, the architects of war and observation, might fail to contain? Each interaction left a residue of doubt across our calculations. Every recorded movement suggested purpose layered upon instinct, resilience coiled tightly within the sinews of their frail bodies. And then, the unexpected occurred. A delegation approached a neutral station, surrounded by species known for their ruthlessness.
The humans did not falter. They advanced with a nervous energy that should have been paralyzing, yet the stance of their leader was unyielding. We observed the tiniest of signals, a flick of the hand, a controlled breath, a deliberate step forward. The predators around them paused, instinctively sensing an anomaly. The humans were neither threatening nor submissive. They were something else entirely. We recorded the event with meticulous attention. Their unassuming forms, their trembling voices, their awkward postures, every detail catalogued. And yet a sense of awe began to infiltrate our observations. This species, so fragile, so unlikely, radiated an invisible authority. The cosmos itself seemed to hold its breath. Could creatures so seemingly weak redefine power? Could their survival be driven not by numbers, weapons, or fleets, but by something far more elusive, intent, courage, and the refusal to be overlooked? As the humans completed their first negotiations and withdrew from the station, a ripple passed through the other species present. Subtle, almost imperceptible, it was a reaction born not of fear, but of respect, or perhaps apprehension. We, the advanced observers, felt it most acutely. Our calculations failed to predict it. Our histories contained no precedent. For the first time, we wondered if this small species, trembling yet defiant, was capable of changing not only the fate of themselves, but the trajectory of the galaxy. And so, as they departed, fragile hulls creaking against the vacuum, our instruments hummed with unease. There was something in their trembling that spoke of fire, something in their hesitance that spoke of purpose. Could a species so seemingly insignificant harbor a force we could neither predict nor control? The question lingered in the void, unanswered, as we continued to watch, silently, fearfully, fascinated. The first contact was over. The true reckoning had only just begun. We observed them again, and the unease that had stirred during first contact deepened into something more primal, a creeping astonishment that unsettled even our most disciplined analysts. Humans moved across the theater of interstellar politics and conflict like sparks dancing against a storm. Their actions were erratic by all measurable standards, yet there was a method hidden in the chaos, a glimmer of strategy so subtle it evaded our most precise instruments. In the early skirmishes, they seemed hopelessly outmatched. Our fleets, perfected over millennia of conquest, moved like synchronous predators. Theirs were small, rickety, vulnerable, and yet somehow the humans endured. Each engagement defied logic. Ships that should have been obliterated survived by the narrowest margins. Units surrounded by superior forces broke through, leaving calculated devastation in their wake. Our observers murmured in disbelief. Nothing in our archives could explain it.
They were outnumbered, outgunned, and yet they acted as if they held a secret the universe had yet to understand. We began tracking their interactions with other species, and here the true marvel revealed itself. Where others saw enemies, humans saw opportunity. They approached hostile factions with gestures that seemed naive at first, but each word, each hesitation, each almost imperceptible shift in posture carried weight. One emissary would surrender a trivial resource, a meaningless concession, and the result was always the same. Tension diffused, alliances formed, suspicion tempered. We calculated the probability of success, and our numbers were wrong, again and again. They were rewriting the rules of engagement, not by force, but by audacity, charm, and an intuition that defied all predictive models. Their victories were often quiet, almost invisible. A skirmish would erupt on a fringe planet. By our scans, humans should have crumbled within hours. Yet they adapted mid-battle in ways no strategy algorithm could anticipate. Entire formations altered their courses without signals, anticipating the enemy's counters before they materialized. Losses did not break them. They were not failures, but fuel, each casualty transforming into lessons absorbed faster than any data feed could process. Observing them was like watching a living organism learn in real time, each adaptation sharper, faster, and more unpredictable than the last. Even their mistakes were telling. Errors that should have been catastrophic instead revealed a strange form of foresight. When a supply convoy was ambushed, the humans did not panic. They leveraged the chaos, creating diversions, trapping their assailants in improvised formations. We watched, calculating the odds, and the numbers failed us. What we interpreted as recklessness was something else entirely, a deep, instinctive comprehension of risk, a willingness to gamble with lives, territory, and resources in a manner that produced outcomes no algorithm could project. In diplomatic arenas, the pattern persisted. Humans entered councils and summits with little more than their presence, their confidence, and a faintly disarming smile. They tolerate insult, delayed action, and ambiguity with patience alien to other species. When provoked, they responded with gestures that seemed almost ceremonial, and yet the consequences reshaped alliances. Entire factions shifted loyalties, not because of coercion, but because humans projected a kind of resolve that demanded recognition. It was terrifying, in a way our simulations could not contain, a species whose power derived not from sheer force, but from perception and principle. And then there was their treatment of defeat. We expected despair, retreat, chaos, but they embraced loss as if it were a form of nourishment. Debris-strewn battlefields became classrooms. Broken ships were dissected, cannibalized, understood.
Every retreat, every setback was cataloged with obsessive care, and in each human's eyes burned the quiet fire of defiance. Our analysts began whispering about the will of humans, though such terminology is crude in our lexicon. What we were witnessing was a force unconstrained by conventional metrics of survival. Victory, for them, was measured not in conquest, but in adherence to principle, in the refusal to bend even when the odds were insurmountable. We began to see it everywhere. their leaders choosing impossible gambits, their soldiers improvising with tools and weapons that seemed inadequate, their civilians rallying with uncanny cohesion. They moved like dancers on a battlefield we thought we controlled. Every move was unexpected, every pause pregnant with potential. They defied the laws of probability, weaving success from the fabric of chaos. And the more we studied them, the more we realized that no calculation could anticipate their next action. Predictability, our greatest advantage, was absent in them. In one particular engagement on the Outer Rim, the humans were confronted by an overwhelming force of mechanized drones. Their formation was scattered. Our systems predicted annihilation within hours. Yet they adapted with staggering ingenuity, feints, ambushes, environmental manipulation. Drones were ensnared in traps that no other species could conceive in real time. Small, agile craft darted between larger ships, exploiting weaknesses we had assumed were impossible to reach. Within days, the humans had not only survived, they had claimed territory that should have been lost. Watching them, we felt something unfamiliar, awe, tinged with dread. Here was a species that calculated not only moves, but the spirit behind them. They were impulsive, yet deliberate, reckless, yet precise. They treated chaos not as an obstacle, but as a canvas. Their victories were not always spectacular. They were often silent, subtle, but each success reshaped the strategic map in ways we could scarcely comprehend. We began to question the very assumptions that had guided our conquests. Was raw power sufficient to dominate the galaxy if such creatures existed? Could we predict a species whose essence defied prediction itself? Could annihilation be the answer when the very act of aggression only honed their resilience, sharpened their ingenuity, and deepened the mystery of their capabilities? And as we recalculated probabilities, factoring in every battle, every negotiation, every unpredictable maneuver, a shiver traveled through the corridors of our command. Perhaps these humans did not measure victory in the way we understood it. Perhaps they measured it in principle. And for the first time, we understood that principle could be stronger than fleets, more enduring than weapons, and far more dangerous than fear. The humans advanced again, silent, deliberate, unyielding, and we, masters of calculation, were already falling behind. We unleashed our full might.
Fleets of gleaming warships, the culmination of centuries of strategic mastery, moved in perfect synchrony across the void. The humans were visible only as tiny specks against the immensity of space, fragile hulls that should have shattered under even the slightest pressure. Our commanders anticipated a swift, uncomplicated victory. Compliance was expected. Resistance, if any, would be inconsequential. And yet, from the first strike, everything went awry. The humans did not flee. They did not panic. Instead, they adapted in ways that our most advanced predictive models could not account for. An unremarkable planet became a fortress. A crumbling settlement turned into a web of traps. We watched in disbelief as their makeshift defenses, improvised barricades, hidden caches, deceptive formations, neutralized our superior firepower. Our missiles struck empty coordinates. Our boarding parties found ghost towns, corridors filled with empty echoes, and the survivors emerging from shadows with precise, lethal counterattacks. It was not their technology that alarmed us. They were primitive by any conventional metric, but the intelligence behind its use. Every encounter was a puzzle solved in real time, a choreography of improvisation that turned weakness into strength. In one engagement, a small human squad used gravity wells, local atmospheric conditions, and the topology of a broken city to trap an entire regiment of our shock troops. They moved as though they could read our thoughts, anticipating maneuvers that even our most sophisticated strategists had deemed impossible. We began recording every action, desperate for an explanation. Each casualty among them seemed to feed the survivors, igniting a resolve that was almost incomprehensible. We had cataloged fear and panic in every species we had encountered. Here we saw neither. Human eyes burned with clarity and determination, with an almost sacred awareness of their mortality and purpose. It was as though every death became a lesson, every injury a spark that sharpened their focus rather than diminished it. Our report struggled to describe what we saw. How do you quantify ingenuity? How do you measure the force of will?
How can a species so physically fragile appear to predict every maneuver, to counter every strategy before it is even conceived? These were words that failed to capture the raw, electric presence of humans in combat. The more we observed, the more alarming patterns urged. Entire fleets, designed for overwhelming force, became ineffective against their improvisation. A defensive perimeter, expected to collapse under bombardment, instead funneled our attacks into predictable paths they had deliberately left exposed. Mines detonated precisely where we believed we would retreat. Human operatives appeared where there should have been none, dismantling engines, sabotaging weapons, and vanishing again into terrain we had assumed impassable.
Each strike was a statement. Survival was not negotiable, and they would do whatever it took to endure. Even in open space, the anomaly persisted. Small craft, carrying no shields worth noting, danced between our capital ships, avoiding energy beams that should have obliterated them, delivering precise strikes that crippled engines and communications. Our warships, despite superior numbers and firepower, staggered under attacks that were neither systematic nor random. They were intelligent, adaptive, and terrifyingly effective. The humans were not playing by any rules we had established. And yet, it was never purely combat skill that unnerved us. It was the principle behind it, their unyielding will to survive and to endure, and to fight even when the situation was overwhelmingly hopeless. We began to see a pattern. The more brutal the attack we unleashed, the more creative their response became. Desperation did not break them, it refined them. They transformed adversity into opportunity, scarcity into innovation. Their smallest actions had consequences that reverberated across our entire strategic map. In one particular battle on a shattered moon, a squadron of our elite commandos attempted to overwhelm a human encampment with synchronized orbital strikes. Calculations suggested a 99% certainty of annihilation within hours. And yet, when the bombardment ended, only a few scattered ruins remained. The humans had anticipated the trajectories, the timing, even the dispersal of our munitions. Entire facilities had been evacuated, traps set, ambushes prepared in corridors we did not even realize existed. The survivors emerged at nightfall with precision strikes that left our commandos scattered and demoralized. We documented the psychological component with equal astonishment. Humans seemed to feed on adversity. Each loss, each injury, each failed mission became the soil from which they grew sharper, faster, and more resolute. Our own troops, trained for fearlessness, began to hesitate, even to doubt the efficacy of their actions. The humans, fragile and seemingly weak, were bending reality itself, forcing us to question the fundamental assumptions of warfare. For the first time, we feared not their technology, but their spirit. Our calculations could not predict their behavior. Our historical data offered no precedent. And yet every encounter with them left an unmistakable truth. The humans' greatest weapon was not firepower, armor, or fleet size. It was something far more dangerous, a combination of ingenuity, improvisation, and an unquenchable will to survive. Analysts suggested withdrawal, reconsideration, recalibration. We hesitated, unaccustomed to doubt, to uncertainty, to a force that could not be measured. The humans were teaching us, without intent perhaps, that survival alone was not enough. Endurance required creativity, courage, and the audacity to act when all odds seemed impossible. And as our fleets regrouped for what we believed would be decisive action, the humans struck again, turning barren landscapes into fortresses, empty corridors into gauntlets, and our precision into chaos. It became clear this was no ordinary defense. Each human engagement was a statement. Every action declared, silently but unmistakably, that they would not be dominated, not by technology, not by numbers, not by fear. We realized with growing unease that we were witnessing the evolution of a species in real time. Against overwhelming force, they adapted, improvised, and endured. Their actions were lessons carved into the galaxy, each encounter redefining what it meant to be powerful. And as the humans vanished once more into the shadows of the battlefield, leaving destruction behind but surviving where survival was deemed impossible, we understood that the true weapon of this species was something we could not control. something we could not calculate, something far more dangerous than any fleet or superweapon we had ever possessed. An indomitable will. Our next orders would be to strike again, to overwhelm them. But we hesitated. For the first time, our commanders doubted. For the first time, fear seeped into the void between the stars. The humans were no longer simply a problem to be solved. They were a force to be reckoned with. And somewhere, across the scattered battlefields and shattered moons, we felt it. The quiet, relentless pulse of a species that refused to yield. The scorched surface of the moon stretched before us like a wound in the void, a barren testament to the violence we had unleashed. Cities that had once clung stubbornly to survival now smoldered in ruin. Smoke rose in ribbons that tangled with the low gravity, drifting like ghostly banners above shattered streets. We had calculated every variable: population density, defensive capabilities, morale. The humans should have been extinguished. Their numbers were reduced to fragments. Their weaponry was inadequate. Their fleets scattered. The outcome was, by all logic, inevitable. Yet we watched, transfixed, as the impossible unfolded. From the ruins, small groups emerged. Leaders, their forms battered, yet unbowed, moved among the remnants of their forces with gestures that seemed insignificant at first. Tilts of the head, raised hands, brief eye contact, but carried meaning we could not decode. They communicated without words, a silent choreography of strategy and reassurance, binding those around them into a single cohesive entity. It was as though the moon itself bent to their will, each crumbling building, each crater, each shadow a canvas for their ingenuity. Our observers recorded with disbelief as these humans transformed chaos into opportunity. Explosions that should have annihilated entire squads instead became shields behind others moved, redirecting fire toward our forces. A collapsed bridge became a funnel, channeling our assault in ways they had anticipated.
Even when faced with encirclement, they did not panic. Instead, they improvised with a clarity that suggested foresight. Barricades, decoys, feints, and traps so precise that our commander's calculations faltered. Every action, every sacrifice became a lesson in audacity. A squad wiped out in one sector became a catalyst for another to strike with renewed precision. We could see it. Their grief was transformed into determination, their fear into calculated courage. A single fallen human seemed to ignite 10 more in a frenzy of resolve, creating a chain reaction that defied probability. Each maneuver was a masterstroke of survival and defiance, and it was impossible to watch without a growing sense of respect and unease. Even the smallest acts carried monumental weight. Children and civilians dragged supplies across open terrain, shielding wounded fighters with nothing more than debris and instinct. Engineers, exposed to bombardment, restored communications lines with astonishing speed, enabling coordinated counterattacks. Leaders moved among the ranks, their presence alone amplifying courage, their silence as effective as commands. One gesture, a brief nod, a pointing finger, a hand pressed to the chest, could shift the tide of engagement in a localized zone. We had never observed such cohesion in any species, not even among the most disciplined militaries we had catalogued. Their weaponry, though rudimentary compared to ours, was wielded with precision that made technology irrelevant. Improvised explosives, repurposed machinery, scavenged armaments, all became instruments of control and terror. Where we expected failure, they created advantage. Where we anticipated retreat, they executed counteroffensives with seamless timing. Every strike, every maneuver seemed preordained, yet it was executed in real time, without discernible planning or command structure that we could measure. It was as if the collective will of humanity had merged into a singular intelligence, an unyielding force that moved as one, yet preserved the individuality of each participant. And then there was leadership, something more than mere strategy. The humans seemed to possess an innate understanding of sacrifice and morale, an ability to ignite hope where we had sown despair. A commander, wounded and unarmed, raised a tattered banner, and the effect was immediate. Scattered groups coalesced, firing with renewed intensity, striking targets we had assumed were already lost. It was not brute force that shaped the battlefield. It was inspiration, resolve, and the courage to persist when annihilation should have been the only rational choice. Our fleets rained destruction upon them. Energy beams cut swaths through streets and valleys. Bombardments flattened entire districts. Boarding parties tore through what remained of defensive positions. And still they endured. They adapted. They evolved under fire. Our numbers should have overwhelmed them. Our weaponry should have reduced them to ash, yet they remained,
relentless, fluid, impossible to eliminate. Each loss, each failure on their side strengthened the survivors, transforming despair into tactical insight. We began to understand that this was not merely defense, it was declaration. Every maneuver was a message. We exist, we endure, we will not yield. It was a statement that transcended tactical success or failure. Even as we observed, calculating the odds of eventual extinction, the humans made it clear that victory, in their view, was measured differently. Survival alone was not sufficient. Survival with purpose, with defiance, and with audacity, that was their standard. From the vantage of our observation decks, we documented patterns that confounded even the most sophisticated AI. Humans anticipated supply lines, intercepted reinforcements, and exploited environmental hazards in ways that suggested predictive reasoning beyond what we had believed possible. They operated simultaneously at the tactical and emotional level. Morale, expectation, and fear were weaponized as effectively as guns and missiles. They leveraged loss, risk, and sacrifice as a force multiplier, creating an asymmetry that we could not model. And perhaps most terrifying of all, there was no surrender, no plea for mercy. Even when wounded, surrounded, and outnumbered, the humans did not bargain. They did not negotiate. They did not retreat in despair. They acted, not out of obligation, not out of instinct alone, but out of principle. Each human life preserved or sacrificed was a calculated act of defiance, a signal that they would endure even when annihilation loomed closer than the shadows cast by our fleets. As we recorded the aftermath of each engagement, we felt something new: admiration, fear, and the creeping realization that our assumptions about the natural order of the galaxy were flawed. These were not creatures to be defeated by firepower or intimidation. They were living lessons in resilience, improvisation, and courage. They reshaped the battlefield not by the strength of their weapons, but by the depth of their will. And as the smoke cleared, as the moon's surface smoldered under our relentless assault, a single truth became undeniable. The humans had become more than individuals. They had become a singular, relentless entity, a force defined not by size, nor technology, nor numbers, but by conviction, audacity, and the refusal to accept impossibility. Our calculations faltered, our fleet commanders hesitated, our AI could no longer predict the patterns emerging before us. The humans were alive in a way that exceeded our understanding. Each sacrifice, each maneuver, each spark of courage was a blow against certainty and self. And yet, the battle was not over.
As our fleets regrouped, preparing for a final decisive strike, the humans disappeared into the shadows of the shattered moon, leaving ruin in their wake, but emerging intact where annihilation had been predicted. We waited, we recalculated, and we realized with a shiver that this species, the fragile, resilient humans, had survived when the galaxy had assumed they could not. The crucible had forged them into something terrifying, and the war had only begun. The battlefield lay quiet, scarred by fire and debris, but the silence was fragile. Smoke curled upward in lazy spirals from shattered settlements. Our fleets hovered in orbit, their sensors sweeping for any flicker of resistance. The humans, battered and diminished, had not fled. They remained. And now, something new emerged, a different kind of maneuver, one that required no weapons, no fleets, no explosions. Diplomacy. At first, we dismissed it. We assumed desperation had forced them into a temporary truce, that this was a pause dictated by fear. Yet as we observed, it became apparent that this was no mere survival tactic. The humans approached negotiations with the same intensity, precision, and subtle cunning that had defined their warfare. They entered council chambers, unarmed and composed, and spoke in measured tones. Each word was deliberate, each phrase weighed, each silence pregnant with meaning we could not decode. Our sensors attempted to interpret their interactions, to catalog intentions. Yet even our most sophisticated algorithms faltered. There was a rhythm to their diplomacy, an unspoken code that guided every movement, every gesture, every nod. It was a language beyond language, a pattern of honor and persistence intertwined with principle. We could not predict their priorities. We could not quantify their patience. We only observed its effect. Those around them, once hostile, shifted subtly, reconsidering options,
questioning aggression, and in some cases, choosing restraint. The humans endured humiliation with a composure that defied expectation. Their emissaries absorbed insult after insult, misdirection after misdirection, yet responded not with aggression, but with calculated respect. They yielded when necessary, yet never surrendered meaning. Even in moments of apparent weakness, they projected quiet authority. One could sense a tension in the room, a gravity that seemed to pull others toward them. It was not intimidation, not coercion. It was the sheer weight of a species that had survived annihilation and now spoke from that experience. In one council, representatives of our own species attempted to leverage fear to extract concessions. The humans listened, silent and still, allowing every insinuation to pass without challenge. Then with a calm clarity, they spoke. Each statement was precise, logical, yet somehow piercing, cutting through diplomacy like a scalpel.
It was not rhetoric, it was truth delivered with the confidence of one who had seen survival carved from impossible odds. And we, observers, felt the subtle shock of recognition. Their words carried force because they were underwritten by the same principle that had allowed them to survive every battle, every ambush, every defeat. What struck us most was their patience. While our species seeks instant advantage, the humans calculated long-term outcomes, appearing to yield when yielding was strategic. They absorbed provocations, delayed responses, and managed the expectations of allies and adversaries alike. Every pause, every seemingly inconsequential gesture concealed intention. We recorded moments that seemed trivial, a slight shift in posture, a quiet glance exchanged between two humans. But the consequences rippled across negotiations, reshaping alliances, expectations, and even the moral compass of those who opposed them. Their adherence to principle was almost sacred. Honor, trust, persistence, these were not abstract concepts, but weapons wielded with subtlety and power. We observed humans refusing offers that might have secured immediate survival, but compromised their integrity. They rejected shortcuts, loopholes in manipulations, even when the stakes were fatal. And in doing so, they conveyed a message more powerful than any fleet. Survival alone was insufficient. True strength lay in consistency, in principle, in the courage to endure without betraying oneself. Even in failure, the humans taught lessons. Negotiations that should have ended in humiliation for them instead became masterclasses in strategic patience. Their calm, deliberate responses reshaped expectations and forced other species to reconsider their assumptions. Allies gained confidence. Enemies hesitated. Observers, ourselves included, experienced the disquieting realization that these humans did not seek mere victory. They sought understanding, endurance, and perhaps the quiet propagation of principle across the stars. We began to suspect something profound. The humans might not need to dominate. Power, territory, conquest, these were incidental. What they required, what they embodied, was resilience in its purest form, the ability to survive, to endure, and to teach. Every negotiation, every careful word, carried the weight of that understanding, and with each success, measured not in land seized, nor fleets destroyed, but in principles upheld, they reshaped the galaxy's perception of what it meant to be strong. As the humans concluded their first formal truce, a ripple passed through the room, quiet, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. Their counterparts, once confident, now measured each step with caution. Respect, or perhaps fear, was taking root, and we, observers from afar, felt the tension deepen. The human strength was invisible, almost intangible, yet it altered the dynamics of power more than fleets or weapons ever could.
And as they withdrew, unarmed and composed, leaving ruins behind but principles intact, we realized with an uneasy clarity, the war we believed we understood had changed. The humans had endured annihilation, negotiated the impossible, and remained unbroken. They had proven that strength was more than force, that victory was more than conquest. They had revealed a new kind of power, quiet, deliberate, and profoundly disarming. And we waited, silently, for what would come next. Because for humans, diplomacy was just another battlefield. The aftermath of the humans' diplomacy lingered like a faint tremor across the galaxy, yet it was only the beginning.
Their resilience, once thought an anomaly, now revealed itself as a force that could reshape the strategic landscape. We watched, recording every action, every ripple, and we began to notice something remarkable. Small victories, seemingly inconsequential in isolation, were compounding into something far greater, a momentum that defied our calculations. A single planet, previously written off as lost, became a hub of unexpected resistance. Scattered humans, barely armed and vastly outnumbered, rallied local populations with a combination of ingenuity, charisma, and unyielding courage. They repaired supply lines that we assumed destroyed, coordinated logistics with nothing but improvisation, and leveraged local knowledge to outmaneuver our forces. To our eyes, it was chaos. To them, it was strategy. The result, entire campaigns collapsed before human ingenuity, campaigns that our algorithms had guaranteed would succeed. Where we expected fear, we saw resolve. Where we anticipated retreat, we witnessed courage. The humans were altering the very fabric of engagement. Their victories were not always dramatic. Sometimes a convoy rerouted, a supply depot salvaged, a single strategic point held against impossible odds. But each success, however small, sent shockwaves through friend and foe alike. Even neutral factions, previously indifferent, paused to reassess allegiances. They watched humans endure, innovate, and inspire, and they questioned what loyalty, strength, and purpose truly meant. It was not brute force alone that created these shifts. It was the humans' perception of themselves and their enemies. Their morale radiated outward, contagious and undeniable. Units that had once fled advanced under human guidance. Commanders who had relied solely on numerical advantage began to hesitate. Entire colonies, previously compliant, began to act in unexpected ways, inspired or perhaps unsettled by the humans' unbreakable will. On one frontier, a series of outposts we had assumed secure fell into human hands without a direct strike. They used terrain, misdirection, and local populations to orchestrate maneuvers that rendered our intelligence obsolete. Each outpost regained was a symbolic blow to our control, a fracture in the certainty of our dominance. Observers whispered that this was not luck, it was intent.
Every human action seemed to carry multiple layers of purpose, calibrated across physical, psychological, and strategic dimensions. And then there were the engagements that defied explanation. Fleets we had deployed to crush small human contingents found themselves encircled, trapped by tactics that appeared spontaneous, yet were precise beyond comprehension. We began to suspect a cognitive pattern, a kind of instinctive calculation that was not algorithmic, but organic. The humans seemed able to measure worth by will rather than firepower, to exploit our assumptions, and to act with a synchrony that made them impossible to predict. The tide was turning, not because of overwhelming strength, but because of principle and resolve. Humans endured bombardments, adapted to environmental extremes, and used every setback as an opportunity to refine tactics. Our confidence, once absolute, began to waver. Where once we believed numbers and technology were supreme, we now realized that the humans' unyielding will was a force of equal, if not greater magnitude. Even the galaxy's neutral powers could not ignore the shift. Ambassadors, traders, and smaller factions observed the humans' actions with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Alliances frayed as observers questioned the inevitability of our dominance. Could a species so small, so seemingly fragile, alter the balance of entire regions of space through sheer tenacity? Could resilience, courage, and ingenuity outweigh fleet size and firepower? The question spread like a quiet contagion. Human victories, though often understated, became templates of adaptation. Other species began to emulate their strategies, to incorporate their improvisation, to value courage as a tactical asset. Their presence inspired hope and fear in equal measure. To watch them was to witness evolution accelerated, a species bending reality through persistence, intellect, and audacity. And still the humans moved forward without fanfare. They did not boast, they did not seek recognition. They simply endured, calculated, and inspired. Each success, each clever maneuver, each act of defiance compounded into a momentum we could neither measure nor contain. Slowly, inexorably, the galaxy began to bend around them. Our certainty faltered. Predictions failed. The advantage we had relied upon for millennia, the predictability of weakness, was gone. We, the observers, felt it most keenly. A species so fragile, so underestimated, was now shaping outcomes far beyond what we had deemed possible. Small victories accumulated, forming a network of influence and resilience that threatened to overturn centuries of expectation. The humans were no longer simply reacting to events, they were defining them. They had become a pivot, a subtle but undeniable fulcrum, upon which the fate of entire systems could shift.
And as we recalculated, as our fleets repositioned, as our analysts strained to make sense of the patterns, one immutable truth emerged. The humans thrived in adversity. They adapted to chaos, leveraged scarcity, and converted obstacles into opportunities. Their victories were as much psychological as physical, reshaping not only the battlefield, but the minds of those who confronted them. The turning tide was underway, quiet yet unstoppable. We could feel it in every calculation, every transmission, every hesitation in the ranks of both allies and enemies. Humanity had begun to rewrite the rules of engagement, and we realized, with a mixture of awe and dread, that the next phase of conflict would not be decided by firepower alone. The humans had become more than survivors. They had become catalysts, instigators, a force whose presence demanded respect. And in the silence before the next engagement, we knew the balance of the galaxy had begun to shift, and we were powerless to stop it. It was an unremarkable village on a distant planet, barely worth noting on galactic charts, a scattering of dwellings nestled among rolling hills, smoke curling from chimneys, children playing in the dust. Our scanners flagged it only because we had learned to catalog every human settlement. And yet, in its ordinary rhythms, the first seeds of terror were already taking root. At first, our fleet dismissed it. The humans visible were civilian in appearance, slight, unarmored, ordinary. Our analysts marked them as inconsequential, a population too fragile to challenge our troops. We underestimated them, as we had underestimated so much before. And it was a mistake that would echo through every command deck, every tactical briefing, every calculation we had made for centuries. Our initial assault was precise, designed to overwhelm. Dropships descended in formation, squads advanced, energy beams cut across streets and alleys. The humans reacted in ways that confounded expectation. They did not flee, they did not panic. Instead, they dispersed in patterns that were neither random nor predictable, slipping between structures with a fluidity that seemed impossible. Small groups disappeared into shadows, re-emerging at points we had assumed empty, striking with calculated precision that left our units scattered and disoriented. At first, we believed it to be luck, an anomaly in their coordination. But as the engagement unfolded, the illusion shattered. The humans who appeared weakest, slight, unarmored, ordinary, were the ones who struck with deadly efficiency. Each move was deliberate, each action anticipated. Entire battalions fell to tactics that seemed preordained, yet executed in real time without apparent command. What was most terrifying was not their weaponry, it was their composure. Fear, hesitation, uncertainty, these were conditions we assumed innate in such fragile forms. And yet, the humans moved as if time itself bent to their perception. Bullets, energy blasts, and shrapnel passed, but they advanced, unhindered, calculating angles, anticipating trajectories, exploiting terrain in ways no algorithm could predict. It was a ballet of destruction, performed with the quiet serenity of inevitability. We attempted to counter their tactics. Reinforcements were deployed, flanking maneuvers initiated, electronic systems scrambled to predict their movements. And yet, for every measure we devised, the humans had already anticipated a response. They used deception masterfully. Civilians, children, farmers, mechanics became shields, distractions, conduits for ambushes. Yet even as they appeared unarmed and vulnerable, the moment of engagement revealed their lethal precision. Shadows became weapons. Every alley, every roof, every doorway concealed danger, and yet no panic was visible on their faces. Our commanders observed, paralyzed with disbelief. A single human operative, carrying nothing more than a simple rifle and a few improvised devices, neutralized squads twice their size. Another coordinated diversion so subtle that we only understood their purpose after entire units were trapped, disarmed, or incapacitated. By all measures, these should have been the weakest points, mere civilians. And yet, they were the strongest, the most dangerous, the invisible force that reshaped the battlefield before our eyes. We began to see a pattern, horrifying in its clarity. These humans had mastered deception not as a strategy, but as a way of being. They wore the guise of innocence, and in doing so, they became unstoppable. Ordinary appearances concealed extraordinary capability. Composure, patience, discipline, and lethal precision were all hidden behind a mask of ordinariness, allowing them to strike when least expected, with efficiency that shattered doctrines we had refined for millennia. Each encounter compounded the dread. Our officers began to whisper among themselves, not about numbers, not about tactics, but about the impossibility of predicting human action.
Our AI recalculated endlessly, yet failed to anticipate the next move. Humans who seemed insignificant became instruments of devastation. Entire defensive formations, carefully plotted, disintegrated before the precision of their improvisation. We realized too late that the battle was never purely physical. It was a war against unpredictability itself. And the humans never hesitated. Unlike other species, who might waver under sustained attack, they adapted in real time. Losses did not demoralize, they educated. Casualties were transformed into lessons, reinforcing strategy and precision for the survivors. Even in the chaos of fire and ruin, each human action was a statement of intent. We endure. We adapt. We strike. We, the Empire, experienced something we had never felt before. True dread.
Not fear of annihilation, not anxiety over numbers, but the creeping realization that our entire system of calculation, prediction, and dominance was irrelevant in the face of a species that did not conform to logic. These humans were a living paradox, fragile yet unstoppable, ordinary yet extraordinary, invisible yet devastating. By the end of the engagement, the village remained intact in ways that defied comprehension. Streets were scarred, buildings damaged, yet the humans were unbroken. Where we expected surrender, we found calm. Where we expected chaos, we found strategy. And through it all, the civilians who had seemed powerless moved among them with quiet purpose, ensuring that every action, every strike, every maneuver amplified the efficiency of their defense. Our commanders convened, stunned. Our analysts recalculated endlessly, but the results were futile. No formula could capture the humans' lethal potential hidden beneath ordinary appearances. One phrase began to circulate through our fleet, whispered in awe and terror. They are shadows of destruction. And we understood, fully, the truth we had ignored for too long. The humans' deadliest weapon was not a gun, nor a fleet, nor an arsenal of warships. It was their mastery of deception, their composure under fire, their refusal to conform to expectation. They made weakness appear as strength, vulnerability as opportunity, and in doing so transformed the battlefield into a landscape where prediction itself became irrelevant. We fled in calculated retreat, not because we were defeated by technology, nor by numbers, but by the unknowable ingenuity of a species that had learned to disguise its deadliest assets in plain sight. For the first time in galactic history, we realized that no calculation, no fleet, no weapon could account for the humans' invisible power. And in the silence that followed, we understood a terrifying truth. Against humans, the battle was never only physical. It was a war against unpredictability itself. After countless engagements across planets, moons, and scattered settlements, a pattern began to emerge that unsettled us more profoundly than any weapon or strategy ever could. Humans were not merely resilient, they were deliberate in their defiance. We had cataloged every maneuver, every battle, every victory, yet it was the decisions behind those victories, the moral calculus, that left us awestruck. They did not act recklessly. They did not rush headlong into chaos without thought. Each choice to fight, each stand taken against overwhelming force was deliberate. Principle guided them where survival alone might have dictated retreat. Entire civilizations, entire populations had been faced with annihilation, yet humans consistently chose to uphold autonomy, honor, and identity over immediate safety. And with every engagement, every choice to resist, they reshaped the rules of our understanding. Our analysts struggled to describe it.
We could quantify numbers, firepower, and territory gained, but how do you measure moral courage? How do you record the weight of a decision made in defiance of certainty? When humans refused to surrender, when they endured bombings and sieges and attacks designed to obliterate them, they were not merely surviving, they were teaching, without words, a lesson in restraint, integrity, and deliberate choice. We began to hesitate. Our fleets, capable of erasing entire cities, held back. It was not mercy. It was an acknowledgement that destruction alone could not conquer this species. Humans had shown us that annihilation is not the measure of power, that dominance is not the measure of strength. Some battles, some wars, are not won by eliminating an opponent, but by understanding the limits of force and the enduring power of principle.
And so we cataloged a new kind of human triumph, not the destruction of our forces, not the capture of territory, but the victories of integrity, leaders who refused to betray alliances, communities that endured hardship without capitulation, soldiers who acted in accordance with conscience even when compliance might have saved their lives. These were the moments that forced our calculations to fail. Each act of defiance became an anomaly in our records, a variable impossible to anticipate, yet powerful beyond measure. We observed humans choosing suffering over compromise, endurance over expedience. A village might be surrounded, a fleet cornered, a colony under bombardment, and yet they refused to yield, not because they sought glory, not because they sought vengeance, but because they understood something deeper. Some things are worth defending even when survival is uncertain. Every battle, every siege, every engagement became more than a contest of force. It became a statement of identity, a testament to the idea that life, freedom, and principle cannot always be quantified or controlled. Even as we rebuilt our strategies, recalculated outcomes, and deployed our forces with ever greater efficiency, we felt the subtle, inexorable influence of their philosophy. Humans had taught us restraint, not through diplomacy, not through threat, but by living their choices in plain view of our fleets. We realized that survival is not the ultimate measure of a species. Endurance without principle, victories without integrity are hollow. Humans had shown us that the measure of a species lies in its capacity to persist with honor, to endure with courage, and to choose defiance even when annihilation is imminent. And with every engagement, with every calculated stand against overwhelming odds, they reshaped not only the physical battlefield, but the moral calculus of the galaxy. They forced us to reconsider what it means to conquer, what it means to be powerful, what it means to endure.
In their choices, in their refusal to yield, in their deliberate, unflinching defiance, humans had become a mirror, reflecting our assumptions back at us and revealing the limits of force as a tool of dominance. For the first time, we understood a principle deeper than strategy, sharper than firepower. Some battles cannot be won by annihilation. Some victories are measured not in destruction, but in integrity. And humans, fragile yet indomitable, had become the custodians of that truth. We cataloged it, recorded it, and observed it with awe. They had survived, yes, but more importantly, they had endured on their own terms. And as we watched them prepare for the next challenge, we knew, beyond doubt, that the galaxy had learned a lesson it had never expected. Defiance, principle, and moral courage are forces as formidable as any weapon, and a species that masters them can bend the universe in ways that technology alone cannot predict. Even as our fleets patrolled the outer systems, scanning for anomalies, we began to notice a phenomenon that defied calculation. The humans endured. They survived not by overwhelming force, nor by sheer numbers, but by a combination of ingenuity, principle, and relentless audacity. And with each engagement, with each improbable triumph, the ripples of their existence began to spread across the stars. Other species, observers, neighbors, even erstwhile adversaries, took note. They began to question long-held assumptions about power, hierarchy, and survival. Fleets that had once marched confidently into battle hesitated. Councils that had once dictated terms without resistance now paused, debating courses of action that suddenly seemed fraught with uncertainty. Where fear had been expected, admiration began to take root. It was not merely the humans' victories that inspired this shift. Their courage was contagious. Witnesses recorded that when a human settlement held against impossible odds, when a squadron of fighters executed maneuvers that defied logic, those who observed, even from light years away, felt a subtle awakening. The defeated, the marginalized, the oppressed began to see possibility in endurance. The humans became a mirror reflecting potential in all who had doubted themselves. Even species who had once plotted against humanity could not ignore them. Analysts noted patterns of hesitation, recalibration, and even in some cases cooperation. Humans did not demand loyalty. They did not coerce obedience. Yet their mere presence, their ability to survive and act with unflinching audacity, challenged the complacency of the cosmos. Each encounter was a lesson. Courage could not be quantified, resilience could not be contained, and principle was a power as formidable as any fleet or weapon. We, as observers, began to understand that humans possessed a force that was neither technological nor physical. It was a spark, an intangible ignition that spread wherever they appeared. Planets once resigned to subjugation now rallied, their inhabitants emboldened.
Fleets that had been confident in their superiority faltered. Even our own calculations, honed for centuries, could not anticipate the cascading effects of human influence. Stories of their triumph traveled faster than ships could carry them. Reports of civilians saving entire colonies, of soldiers defying odds in near impossible battles, of leaders making impossible decisions with clarity and courage, these became legends, inspiring awe and caution alike. Across star systems, the human's presence became a symbol, not of conquest, not of empire, but of endurance, defiance, and the unyielding assertion of identity. Their power lay not in what they controlled, but in what they ignited in others. Species that had once been indifferent or hostile began to adapt, to question, to aspire. Where humans had survived, they had shown that hope was contagious, courage was replicable, and defiance could alter the course of entire conflicts. The galaxy began to shift, subtly yet irrevocably, under the influence of a species that refused to yield. And as we observed, recording these patterns with awe and unease, we realized a profound truth. The humans' legacy was not only in the battles they had won, but in the light they had cast across the cosmos. Their presence alone became a beacon, a reminder that even in the darkest reaches of space, even against overwhelming odds, the spark of humanity could ignite courage, resistance, and possibility wherever it touched. The galaxy, once confident in its order, began to reconsider everything. And in that reconsideration, in that subtle yet unstoppable spread of inspiration, we recognized something we had never encountered before. Humans were more than fighters. They were catalysts. They were teachers. They were the spark that could awaken the universe itself. We watched as the stars settled into an uneasy quiet, a galaxy still scarred by conflict, but transformed in ways we had never anticipated. Across systems, moons, and planets, the echoes of human presence remained. It was not the remnants of ships, not the ruins of settlements, nor the tally of victories that marked them. It was something far more profound, the resonance of their choices, the imprint of their will upon the cosmos. In the end, we understood. Humans are not special because they conquer. They are not special because they wield superior technology or outnumber their adversaries or strike with unmatched precision. Their power lies elsewhere, in their endurance, their defiance, their capacity to inspire. Across centuries and light years, we had cataloged battles, tactics, and fleets, but it was their refusal to yield, even in the face of annihilation, that left the deepest impression. Every act of courage became a lesson. Every decision made under the weight of impossibility became a template for resilience.
Observers recorded human victories not only in territory gained or fleets defeated, but in the way they carried themselves through chaos, calm, deliberate, principled, unbroken. In each encounter, humans demonstrated that survival alone was insufficient. To endure with honor, to act with intention, to uphold principle against overwhelming odds, these were the true measures of their species. We saw their influence ripple outward. Entire star systems began to reconsider assumptions about strength, dominance, and loyalty. Neutral species, once content to observe, found themselves inspired, questioning what it meant to endure, to lead, to act with courage. Even the most calculating of empires hesitated in the presence of human resolve. Their power was not coercive, it was catalytic, invisible yet undeniable. The galaxy had learned that resilience could outweigh numbers, that principle could outweigh weaponry, and that courage could ripple through civilizations more effectively than fleets ever could. And yet, humans themselves sought no recognition. Their actions were not for glory or fame. They did not seek accolades, nor did they bend the cosmos to their will through fear. They acted because it was right, because it was necessary, because it aligned with a deeper understanding of purpose. Their victories were quiet, their defiance understated, but the effect was transformative. We, as observers, felt a humility unfamiliar to our kind. We had measured, predicted, cataloged, and calculated for millennia. We had believed that power was something that could be quantified, controlled, or broken. And yet, humans revealed a force we could not measure, a strategy beyond computation, a weapon beyond destruction.
the indomitable will to endure and to inspire. Across worlds, across generations, we documented these moments. The child who resisted fear, the soldier who stood against impossible odds, the communities that endured siege and bombardment without compromise. Each became part of a legacy that no force could erase. We recorded the patterns of their choices, the subtle influence of their courage, and the way their presence reshaped the moral and strategic fabric of the galaxy. In reflection, we realized the truth. Humans leave a mark not through destruction, but through example. Their legacy is woven into the cosmos itself, a series of choices that radiate beyond the immediacy of war. They endure, they defy, and they inspire. Each act of courage, each moment of principled defiance becomes a beacon for all who observe. Even those who opposed them could not escape the gravity of their example. We cataloged, we analyzed, we observed, and still we marveled. Their greatest weapon is not technology, nor strategy, nor numbers. It is their will, indomitable, unflinching, unstoppable in its subtle, pervasive force.
Across the void, across the stars, across time, humanity demonstrates a truth we cannot ignore. The universe is reshaped not only by fleets and empires, but by those who endure when survival seems impossible, who defy when submission is expected, and who inspire when hope has all but vanished. And so, as the galaxy settled into a tentative peace, we recorded the final lesson humans imparted. To endure is to shape, to defy is to teach, and to inspire is to wield the ultimate power. All else, the wars, the fleets, the battles, are echoes, but the will of humanity, their courage, their principle, persists. That is their legacy. We watched, we documented, and we understood. The humans are not the most powerful because of their weapons. They are the most formidable because of their spirit. And in that understanding, we, the observers of countless worlds, finally felt awe. For they do not merely survive. They endure, they defy, they inspire. And in doing so, they reshape the universe itself.